Morning.
How are you all? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Hope many of you survived yesterday and you still decided to come back for more today. We're here anyway, so we survived and we had such a fantastic day, meeting new people, reconnecting with long-standing friends and colleagues, and being blown away by the quality of the conversation and the debate. It was far exceeding our expectations, so thank you. And so we set the bar quite high for today, I believe. And of course, we now know how to celebrate Christmas, so that's going to make us all very joyous. The important things that are happening today are just, setting us off on what was an amazing video just now. So many thanks to the Zest Theatre Company, who actually are a group in Bradford, who are just doing amazing stuff, showcasing people across the Northeast. So thanks for that. And clearly we want to celebrate in the future far more of your work. And we know that this is a particularly challenging time for the creative industries as much as everyone else. So we will try and help in any way we can to promote the great things that make us all feel really good about ourselves. So we've got a really interesting day ahead again, and we can hang on to you in this room for most of the morning. So we've got Nazir and colleagues who'll be looking at a session around taking the knee, which will follow from this. So today is a big day in terms of the public spending announcement, in terms of spending review. We've heard about Christmas yesterday, and we'll be hearing about the tiers of restrictions across the country tomorrow. So we're watching and trying to understand how local voice, local leaders, local influence is shaping some of that stuff. And it's very important to us, to all of us, isn't it, that we feel we're being understood and represented. And we don't just want popular views about getting back together, because actually there is still a pandemic and there is still a virus out there that is not yet controlled. So our priority is to each other, to respect each other's personal boundaries and not get too carried away with our rights to have a really fantastic celebration. So let's all be thoughtful about what we need to see, which is stronger public health messaging, stronger messaging about getting this thing under control. So I know I can get that message across to you guys, and we will respect each other. So on that, let's just, I'm going to hand over to Steph in a moment. She's just going to take us through some of our etiquettes around using Zoom, etc. We had a little moment yesterday, which she's going to share with you, which was interesting and something that we'd planned for. But thanks again. I'll see you this evening. And Tracy Fishwick and I are going to give you the send off. We're going to talk a little bit about our plans for the next 12 months. And during the course of the day, get stuff on Padlet and get stuff in the chat room about what you want from us, what you want more of, what you want less of. And as importantly, don't forget to let us know about what you want to see in the North that is precious and important to you, and also what you won't tolerate. So we'll be collating that stuff that you've been sending in, and we'll feed some of the back later on today. So have a great time. Stay with us, stay in, check in, get your cup of tea, come back, and keep talking and keep supporting each other. And I'll see you this afternoon. So I'm going to hand over to Steph now. See you later.
Thanks very much, Edna. And a warm welcome from me. I'm Steph from the People's Powerhouse. Thank you all for rejoining us this morning. I just want to go over a few little points of Zoom etiquette, as Edna said. So the first is, and I'm sure you're all very used to this by now, having lived probably done a lot of Zoom meetings over the past 7 or 8 months. But the first thing is to please just make sure that you keep yourself on mute unless you're talking. That would be absolutely fantastic. We've got the chat function, and we'd love you to use that throughout the day to just get involved, respond to what speakers have said, ask questions, get to know one another using that function. That would be brilliant. I was going to say in the very unlikely event that we're Zoom bombed, what the protocol is for that, but we were unfortunately Zoom bombed yesterday. So what that means is that we get hacked from an outsider, and we just want to make sure that we're prepared in case that happens today. So in the unlikely event that we are Zoom bombed, what will happen is we will close the meeting that you were in, and we would ask you to direct yourself to the coffee and chat room where we'll reissue a link. So if for any reason the meeting ends unexpectedly, if you can take yourself to the coffee and chat room, we can give you some further instructions from there. But we've got our fingers and toes crossed that that won't happen to us again today. And just on the last thing to say really is that the session's being recorded. So if you don't want your face on the recording, please keep your video off. And if you've got any particular questions around that, please email us at people@peoplespowerhouse.org.uk. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nazir as he takes us through the next session. Thank you very much and enjoy your morning.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Edna, and good morning to everybody. It's an absolute delight to see you. Of course, unfortunate that we can't see each other in person, but I hope that we'll have that opportunity as soon as we possibly can. This session, well, today is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And it begins the United Nations 16 Days of Activism. And activism is a really good word for what we're about to discuss. As you will all, I'm sure, know, during the summer, particularly after the murder of George Floyd in the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement became international, and we began to have a conversation with each other, I think, which is one of the wonders of movements, about something that perhaps had been unsaid. And the thing that obviously affects us, and the reason why we're having this discussion, is that there's a significant realization that the North, and particularly large parts of the North, are actually built on profits from the slave trade. So Liverpool, Manchester, I'm sure there are other parts of the North that similarly are built on that. We learned that there are so many streets and buildings that were named after either slave owners or people who made their money from the slave trade, or said some really very inappropriate things about the slave trade. And the conversation was about whether or not that history has a part to play in the present and in the future. And I think that's part of what our discussion is about. I learned also, I mean, one of my heroes, I did a Great Lies for Radio 4 on Gandhi about a couple of years ago. And I didn't realize that Gandhi had come to Lancashire in the 40s late 30s, because Lancashire and the textiles trade was, in the view of the Indian population pre-empire, or in the empire, taking jobs from them. And they wanted, and they got extraordinary support from the union leaders here in the North to help them ultimately win the argument for freedom and liberty and the creation of India, Pakistan, and as it now is Bangladesh. And so we've always had a part to play in terms of liberation. We've always understood the role of race, and what we hope to discuss in the next 45 minutes or so is the North's Black nation history, where the North has actually contributed to racial progression, what more there is still to do. The question in the title is, should the North take the knee, with a question mark. I hope that you all agree the answer to that question is yes. It's the answer question we have to ask ourselves is how, and what does it mean to be able to show our allyship and actually develop something that makes the lot of Black nation and minorities in the North better than it ever has been. I'm very fortunate to be joined by four fellow presenters, Gulwali Pasale, Amber Akunu, Fawzia Johnson, and Professor Erin Mabel, MBE. Some of you will know, some of you may not know. And what I will do to start with is ask each of them to give you a minute or so on just their background, and then we'll go into the more details. So can I ask Gulwali if you share a little bit about yourself? You need to unmute yourself, Gulwali.
I completely forgot that. Good morning, Afzal. Good morning, Nazir, and everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Gulwali, as you said. I'm originally from Afghanistan. I've been living in Bolton in the Northwest for the last 11, 12 years. And I'm the author of this book called The Lightless Sky. I encourage you to have a read. It's a story of my journey from Afghanistan to Britain as an unaccompanied minor about 13 years ago. And at the moment, I do a lot of work around advocacy and campaigning for refugees' rights and social justice. And so, yeah, I went to the University of Manchester. I did my politics degree there, and I think we met there a few times in Manchester. And yeah, looking forward to the conversation and discussion today.
Yes, good way. Thank you very much indeed. Amber?
Yeah, hi, my name is Amber. I'm from Liverpool. I'm an artist and a filmmaker, and also the co-founder of Rooted Scene with Fuzia Johnson. And it's basically a magazine for people of colour in the northwest of England. I'm also a student at Goldsmiths studying documentary filmmaking.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Fuzia?
Hello everyone, good morning. I'm a freelance artist, curator and producer. I'm from the South, but I moved to Liverpool in 2007. And I explore themes in my artwork and my curation about being queer, about having mental health issues, and also about being a person of colour.
Thank you very much. And finally, Erinma.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Erinma Bell, professor now. I'm a community activist. I'm based in Moss Side, Manchester. A lot of my work is around anti-gun and gang crime. I'm also a deputy lieutenant for the County of Greater Manchester and the first female to have a statue of herself in Manchester Town Hall in 150 years. Had to get that one.
No, I just think that's quite extraordinary, isn't it? If you think about it, the fact you're the first,
Yeah.
even that really beggars belief. But it's a phenomenal testament, Erinma, to what you've achieved. Okay, so if I can start with the first question, really, to each of you, a couple of minutes, really, if you in terms of an answer. What is your personal experience of being a person of colour here in the north of England? And if you can frame it around what's the good, what's the bad, and what's the ugly. I'll start with you, Gulwali.
That's a really interesting question. So when I arrived to the UK about 13 years ago, I first arrived in Kent from France. And one of the reasons I moved to the north was because my uncle was living in Bolton and my brother was living in Manchester. And that's the story for most refugees. Normally they move to the north because there's an assumption that the north is a lot more friendly and welcoming, which is true, but also because they have family members and relatives. And so my experience of moving from Kent to the northwest was, Kent was, I experienced racism and some discrimination, unfortunately. But when I moved to Bolton, I felt belong. I felt a sense of part of the community because there was a lot of Afghans there. It was a very diverse place. It was very multicultural. I could just walk around in my shalwar kameez. I could just go to the mosque. It was very, it was a very nice environment. So that's why I lived there for the last, 11, 12 years. I went to school in Bolton. I went to college there, and then I went to Manchester University. And so my experience of the North has been quite positive. I have, since publishing the book, I've traveled to about 200 towns and cities in the UK. I have had a lot of warm welcome everywhere I went, but I think in the North, I really feel home. Just north of, even Birmingham, like north of Birmingham, it feels very different. And the thing that upsets me about the North is, especially when I was going to Manchester Uni, every morning I would take the tram from Bolton to Oxford Road and then walk from the Oxford Road to Manchester Uni, and I'll see so many homeless people. That really upsets me, not only then, but now, and also the lack of, inequality and the support, especially when it comes to ethnic minority, especially asylum seekers, who are, majority of them are dispersed and based in the Northwest because it's cheaper. So, for example, Bolton have a lot more asylum seekers than the whole of southwest of England put together, because the Home Office gives contract to private agencies. They make profits, they make money, and then put people in really inadequate accommodations. And there's already community tensions are already high. But the North has been very welcoming towards refugees. But the negative thing is that homelessness and inequality. And the positive is that it's very friendly, very diverse. I had a wonderful time living in the Northwest, and I really felt I haven't really experienced a feeling of unwelcomeness. But also, it makes me sad that a lot of towns in the Northwest, in the North, voted for Brexit, and I feel like that's because the government wants them to blame for their problems and inequalities and lack of opportunities and migrants and foreigners and European citizens, when actually it's the government who are responsible, and how there's a huge divide between the North and South.
Thank you very much indeed, Gulwali. Amber, what about the same question to you, really? Your experiences, good, bad, and ugly?
Yeah, I think the good, so I spent like the first 13 years of my life living in Toxteth in Liverpool. And I think like living in Toxteth in like a very diverse environment was probably like the best thing about being in Liverpool, being in the north. I think it was just nice to be able to feel a sense of belonging and to be able to like go to the shop and get like Nigerian food and have people that look like me, and we all really like was there for one another. And if we needed help, like if like I'd get my hair braided by the neighbor, or like if you need food, like someone's always there. So I think that was definitely like that's the most positive. I think the challenging part is I think because the north is so known for being friendly, that like racism is sometimes not believed. So when I like express like racist experiences, often it's like, oh no, like Liverpool is so friendly that I can't imagine that happening here. So yeah, I think that's it for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually very true, isn't it? That because of the feeling of warmth and welcome that you've just described, a sense of complacency, or of almost blindness. It's not something that impacts or affects us because we're not like the racists down south or wherever it may be. Another thing both you and Gulwali have touched on is the fact that we tend to, you described that you're in parts of the north where there's a larger population of minority. We tend to live together or close to each other, to put it bluntly, and you both described that as a positive, namely access to food and community and family, etc., etc. But again, you will have probably heard the phrase, "They all stick together." Yeah, seen as a negative racist attack rather than the positives that both of you have described for that particular thing. We'll come back to that later, I'm sure. Fozia, what about yourself? Same question.
I think the positives is especially within the arts community, because if you think about the Northwest, 10% of people who live there are of colour, so the arts community, you can imagine it's a lot smaller, is sharing our own experiences with each other, but also sharing tips on how to develop our careers with each other is really positive in terms of being a person of colour in the Northwest. With the same statistics in mind, a lot of my friends aren't of colour. That makes me feel like I can't talk to them about certain things to do with race because I've got this like paranoia that they're gonna feel that I don't know, they're not gonna believe it, or they're gonna gaslight me in some way and say, "Oh, are you sure it's not this? Are you sure it's not that?" and not actually my colour. So that's kind of like the not so good bits. And coming from
is that because you've chosen, you think, a career in arts and the arts aren't representative of the communities that you come from?
Yes, that is not representative or whatsoever. Like I was talking about this yesterday on administrative level, directors of institutions, the people who are actually displayed within art galleries and museums are not of colour. So it's hard to envision yourself there if you don't see yourself represented. So then when you're talking to friends and you're looking for support, oftentimes you feel invalidated by their response because, you know, you want to talk and you want to be understood and listened to at the same time.
Thank you very much indeed. Arimma, same question to you.
You know, for me, I mean, I'm born and brought up in Manchester, Russia and Moss Side. And I suppose growing up, you know, you were one of very few people of colour, you know, in your class at school, whether nursery or school. You know, well, in the first instance, it doesn't really bother you. But, you know, when you're growing up and people are saying things, I suppose the bad was, you know, you're being told to go back to your country. I mean, when you're 6 and 7, you have no idea where your country is. You know, your country's here, you know, so that's kind of like really confusing when you've been told go back to your country, or you're being told your people live in trees. I mean, and monkeys, I'd never seen a monkey, you know, so I suppose that was the bad part growing up, that people didn't understand, you know, that, you know, you're human as well. You know, you're born here, you're British, just like them, they're British. The only difference that we had was difference in our skin tones. So, you know, that was the bad. But growing up, you know, yes, our neighborhood that we were in, more or less, well, the immediate neighbors where we lived, it was kind of funny. There was like private houses on one side, which as I grew older, I understood, and like a council estate on the other side. And on the one side where it was the private houses, it was, you know, like Black people that lived there, Africans, Jews. We had an Indian lady was our neighbor. And that's because, you know, they couldn't get council places and that, so they had to, you know, buy their own. And so we always had standoffs with the people across the road, you know. But, you know, growing up, you learn that, okay, there is another place that you're from, that your parents are from. So, you know, you're kind of armed with that information and that knowledge. So growing up, it wasn't, you know, I think racism, whilst it was there, it was not an issue because our parents taught us who we are and where we're from and what we're about. But what I found, the bad thing or the ugly thing, I think it was more ugly, you know, when you're working in places, it was that the covert racism, you know, that people had towards, you know, they would say certain things and do certain things. And these were adults now, I'm talking like in my adult life now. And, you know, and you're kind of like, yes, everybody's nice and that, and you kind of like have to think, did they just say that? Did they mean this? You know, what was that about? And like the young ladies have said, usually if you did bring it up, you were always the one blamed for them doing the oppression on you, you know, whereas, and you know, like if I had mentioned something, people would say to me, oh, you have an issue with your color. I don't have an issue with my color. You have an issue with my color. And that's why you make certain remarks. And so I think for me, it was that covert racism, which was the issue and probably still is the issue, because we still believe, you know, in this country that we don't have an issue, you know, with racism. So there's certain things we don't talk about. Whereas I believe we should talk about those things, those difficult conversations, let's have them, you know, because that's how we all gain knowledge about each and every one of us. And we're always told, there's another phrase where, you know, because I went into teaching as well, where we're told, you know, you have to appreciate differences. Well, we can only appreciate differences if we begin to understand what the differences are and what the differences are all about. So, you know, we have all these lovely terms that we come out with, but we don't really understand what they mean. It's just like rhetoric. And that's probably the bad and the ugly. The good is that, yeah, Manchester is a place where people, you know, will campaign, will come together, will speak out for each other. And I suppose sometimes they do dare to, like me, a community activist, you know, put your head above the parapet, because somebody's got to take that first move. And I think that's what's good about the North, that we will stand up for our rights, no matter who we are and what section of community we come from. We believe we have rights and we will stand up for them.
That's very good of you. Thanks for saying that. A couple of things that flow out of what all four of you have said. One, you talked about when, Fozia, you were talking about the environment that you work in. I think Erin just touched on that as well. Leaders, I mean, I spoke at an NHS Confederation event in January. There are 400 people in the room, and Lord Victor Adebayo, you probably know, is the chair of the Confederation. So he was chairing it. I was a keynote speaker, and everybody else in the room was white. And that was the NHS senior leadership, which you will appreciate is 25% from minority ethnic backgrounds. So there's an issue, isn't there, about rising to leadership positions or being able to rise to leadership positions. The other thing comes from what you said, Arimba. Today, we've seen the Equalities Commission come out with a report saying that the government's response to the Windrush issue, the hostile environment, etc., was illegal. It was against our laws. And we've also learned that there's another flight leaving on the 2nd of December, deporting, you know, rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to comment on that. The point that needs to be made is some of those people came to this country at 6 or 7, and they've been here 40 or 50 years. And, you know, they're now being sent to somewhere they just have nothing in common with them. You know, so all of that narrative does make us feel, or does, you know, what I'm picking up, that perhaps we haven't gone as far as we should. So the next question really to the four of you is around the Black Lives Matter movement and the importance of progress. Let's ask the question: what can we do? What can be done? Not what can we do. What can be done to influence true progress? And I'll start again. Gulwali, if you don't mind sharing a thought or two.
Sure. Thank you. I mean, I'm not a black person, but I'm a kind of a person of kind of color or ethnic background. So I feel like what can be done is we need reforms at every level. We need an academic place, universities, and education system, because in the UK, when I went to school, there was very little thought about the British Empire, the colonialism. I mean, I was speaking at an event recently, and somebody said, "Oh, you are here because we were there," and I was like, "That's a really good point." So the British kind of influence and its empire it had on the world, and the culture, exporting the culture and the language across the world, they were very happy to go and colonize places and make us civilized. But then when we become civilized and move to Britain, then we are not welcome. So I think definitely there needs to be a change in education system. I think our politicians in the media has been doing a very good job in creating divisions and fear, especially for foreigners and immigrants and refugees, and how we've been portrayed in the dehumanizing language that's been used by responsible politicians. I feel like in the last few years since Brexit, I feel like politicians and some people have a green light to insult. They think it's okay to be racist. So I think it's great that the Black Lives Movement had came about. I mean, the oppression and injustice and racism and discrimination, institutional racism has been happening for years, and people weren't really able to kind of discuss it as openly. Even now, like it has become mainstream, but there are people in high-level positions in parliament, in government, who are opposed to it, who sees it as not a very positive thing, and they're like, oh, we are the least racist country in Europe or in the world. I mean, that doesn't make sense because we're still racist and there's still racism. So I feel like there needs to be reforms at every level, and we as individuals need to realize our rights and responsibility, but also the unconscious bias. And I've been doing some work with Quakers, and there's been a work around power and privilege. Sometimes we don't realize the power and privilege we have. Sometimes, people say, oh, I'm disadvantaged, I'm a working class white person, and I've been struggling, I've been having challenges. Yes, but your color is not one of those challenges. You may have challenges for other reasons and other things, but it's not just because of your color. Most of Black people and people from ethnic minority have challenges specifically because of their nationality and because of their background. So I certainly think there needs to be a shakeup of the system, but also we need to realize as individuals, as collectively, as a community, that we need to get more, ethnic minority and Black people involved in the decision-making process. As you were saying, within NHS, with a lot of organizations, you see very few people who looks like us, and that's a problem that needs to change. So other young people, so I could look up to you saying, Nazir, you are the public prosecutor, and I could actually be there. But if there is nobody like you, then it's very difficult for me to think that I could actually achieve something, a high-level position and be able to influence things and make a difference.
No, thank you for that. You're absolutely right. You will be what you see. If you don't see people, I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, the only white people I saw were, to put it bluntly, were the doctor, my teacher, and that's about it. You made a very valid point about the phrase white privilege. We'll come on to that, I suspect, if we've got time. I don't know if any of you saw Kyle Rittenhouse, the young man that killed two people in Wisconsin, was given bail yesterday. £2 million was crowdfunded. $2 million was crowdfunded to get him bail. Now, whether he murdered them or not, he did definitely kill two people. Now, the question that was asked and regularly asked online, can you imagine if the Muslim community, for example, raised $2 million to get bail for an alleged Muslim terrorist or something, or a Muslim killer, how that would be perceived? And there's an element of some people can get away with blue murder, and others sadly face enormous obstacles. But that's by the by. Can I just touch on perhaps what Amber wants to add in terms of what do you think would make a difference, Amber, to your life and the lives of people of color?
Yeah, so I think, like the Black Lives Matter movement has been going on for 7 years. And I think the fact that we've had to protest over and over again shows that we're not at the place that we need to be. And I personally think that we still need to get a level of understanding. I still think we're at that base level of just trying to let people know that racism is real. Like, I was on Twitter last night and there was a post by Sky, I think it was, about how Black women are more likely to die at childbirth, and I made the mistake of reading the comments, and the comments were awful. They were like, most of them were just saying, oh, like, this is just trying to divide people, it's all false, why do people make everything about race? And it just made me realize that people really do not believe racism is a thing, or systemic racism is a thing. And I think we still need to educate people that it's real, unfortunately, even though it's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Amber, I mean, you just mentioned something which reminded me of something else. Some of you will know the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, has written this morning about having a miscarriage. Now, I dare you not to read what's been written on Parler and a number of other sites about that. The one phrase that I will never forget in my life, written by somebody, is "one less black baby in the world." You know, that sadly is what we're up against, and that's the most extreme example, or extreme examples. But it's the day-to-day examples that I think you're touching on in your conversation. Fozia, is there anything you think that we can do differently or should be done differently?
I think viewing Black Lives Matter protests and movements and not seeing it as, you know, not seeing protest in general as a past, as a historical thing, like, you know, notable movements in the 20th century, but seeing it as current and evolving and innovative and also effective. Because I think seeing it as a past thing doesn't create like meaning to it as much, if that makes sense. And unfortunately, if you're in a position of privilege, you have to see things visually to believe that it's happening, and protest is part of that. And that's why Black Lives Matter has supported that as well. And I also think, you know, in companies, make it, even like how small organizations, small companies, grassroots, whatever, make it mandatory that they have to have equality and diversity things to, you know, kind of like look at their organization, especially if you're white and you're starting something, make sure that you are actually effectively outwardly researching other people of color to join your organization, and don't ask other people of color to give you suggestions, do the research yourself as well. But also, like Wally said, about education and keeping education consistent. So not just in primary school and high school, make it in college as well, in university, just keep it consistent and, you know, sow it through everything that you talk about, because it's here and it's never going away. Hopefully it does one day, but, you know, it's good to have an optimistic view, sort of.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I look at Star Trek. In the 23rd century, there's no racism. So at some point in the next 200-300 years, we'll get there. But I remember just on that well, adding to that, you did some phenomenal work in Moss Side at the time when it was when the area was called Gunchester, remember? And a lot of that, I suspect, was black on black gang related activity, and more often than not, every time I prosecuted a black person or an Asian person, you'd get lots of racists saying, "Well, they're all like that, aren't they?" And why are you picking on subjects that give the racists a sledgehammer to beat our communities with? You know, why did you do the work that you did?
I think, you know, I did the work I did, which, by the way, did help to reduce gun crime in Manchester by 92%. But I did it because of many of those headlines about it's black on black crime, it's only black people that carry guns, it's only black people that are shooting each other. Whereas the reality of the matter was, no, it wasn't. You know, the color of the hand that pulled the trigger was not always black. You know, it just wasn't. You know, we knew of white youths that were involved in gang crime and gun crime. We knew of Asian youths. You know, there were lots of different people. And I do remember having a conversation one time with one of the Home Secretaries who, you know, and it was such a weird conversation, because basically I went there to complain. And what are the government doing about it? And I remember I was told, oh, well, it's a Moss Side problem. And I was like, no, it's a UK problem. In the UK, we've got young people that run around with guns. And it was, no, we have black boys in Moss Side that run around with guns. And I was like, what? You know, and again, it was one of those moments where you're thinking, are they really saying what I think they're saying? So, you know, I said, well, when I left Manchester to come to London, Manchester was still part of the UK, you know, so we are part of the UK and we shouldn't be seen, you know, as separate. But a lot of it was, you know, I mean, Moss Side was talked about as if it was a place that didn't belong, didn't belong in England, that wasn't in England. You know, we were an island of our own, you know, full of all these black people that do what they want, you know, disregard the law. You would read headlines and you would think every third person in Moss Side carried a gun, you know, because that's the way the headlines wrote. And to me, they all banded together to create that narrative, you know, about Black people and about the Gunchester, and basically demonizing a whole community of people. That's what it was, demonizing. Coming on to the Black Lives Matter thing, I think it's absolutely great. One thing we realize is that we're not in the place that we thought we were. And for me, the Black Lives Matter thing, because like Amber has already said, it's been going on for years, you know, they've been talking about it for years. But I think what we tend to do, because we're in Britain, we think, oh, it's an American thing. You know, it's not like that over here. Whereas the thing is, it's just, I suppose our officers are not as brutal, you know, as in shooting people. But, you know, it still happens over here. And one of the things that it has done, that BLM, it's given us the opportunity to actually have the conversation. Let's talk about the conversation of race and color. You know, again, it's going back to, because I do all this thing about difficult conversations. Let's have the conversation. You know, if you, you know, a person that's not of color, if you think I have an issue with my color, let's talk about that. You know, let's really talk about that conversation. It's also given people, organizations, the opportunity to look inward and look at themselves. You know, look at their boards, you know, how representative are you of the communities or the city that you're in? And most of them are not, you know, you know, and also talk about that tokenism, because most of the time there is a token person of color, you know, who's not really given any other title than the token. You're not given the, you know, you don't rise any further. You know, that ceiling, if there is one, you know, you never see it, you know, even though you know you qualify for it. So it's all those kind of things and now coming to the surface, which have always been there, because people again think it's something new. You know, racism and that covert race, it's nothing new. It's always been there, you know. So yeah, you know, I think we've still got a long way to go. And as Gulwali mentioned, you know, even it's not only about our schools, but it's also about our leaders, you know, the politicians, the language that they use as well, you know, shouldn't justify and normalize, you know, negative language towards any race of people. But sometimes some of the language and the terms they use, it kind of like qualifies and allows people, oh, well, if our decision makers, our government is using such language, we can as well. And I think on the streets, it turns out, or grassroots in communities, it turns out to be something completely different. And we have to be mindful of that.
No, absolutely. I mean, it was quite chilling that people, you know, there were people saying, when people were protesting on the streets, and some of the stuff in America got violent, didn't it? It's not because of the protesters, but because of perhaps the people against them. But nonetheless, it got violent, and people were saying, "We don't want that kind of violent protest. We should all be like Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, both of whom were assassinated, by the way, for their non-violent protests." So you can't win, can you? We literally can't win.
And can I just add, because we were talking about, you know, people's reactions. I mean, you talked about Meghan Markle. Something else that struck me, which I just thought, wow, the Sainsbury's advert. Yeah. People are all up in arms about the Sainsbury's advert. And when I first saw it, I didn't even, to tell you, I just thought, oh, that's a nice advert. Because, you know, everybody does these Christmas adverts. It's like you say, when you start going on Twitter and reading all the things that you think, wow, is that how people still are now? 21st century. You know, which shows we've got a long way to go. You know, and it's that covertness as well.
Oh, it's overtness as well.
Overtness now. Yeah.
And I think social media doesn't help. Well, yeah, social media is a force for good, obviously, but at the same time, people feel anonymously behind the keyboard. They can say what they like and do what they want. And I think, I mean, the three of our panel probably were alive when the Macpherson report was published. At the end of the 90s. That really ages us big time. But, you know, do you remember back then? I think all of us, the rest of us probably do, every organization admitted they were institutionally racist. It was almost like a competition. You know, who could do it first? Who could do it loudest? And then we're having the same conversation now, 20 odd years later. So why didn't they improve? You know, I was asked that question around justice, for example. Today, 2021 nearly, if you're a black person, you are still 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched. You are more likely than a white person to be arrested, more like for the same offence, the same evidence, more likely to be charged with the same evidence, more likely to be remanded in custody, more likely to be convicted, more likely to be sent to prison on the same evidence as a white person throughout the system. You know, and so the system remains institutionally broken, racist, whatever you want to call it. And you know, what Arimba said a moment ago about, well, she didn't use the phrase, but a bit of tokenism. You said lip service, I will say. You know, pretty much every organisation I imagine has got a diversity officer, a equalities officer, and often it's somebody, a person of colour. But they don't sit on the board. They don't have any executive role, very often than not. And so the reality is, on the face of it, it looks like things have changed. The reality, the lived experience, as they call it, more often than not, hasn't changed. But we've got about 10 minutes or thereabouts. So I want to, if you don't mind, look at what do we're very fortunate to be joined by a large number of people who are our white allies. Ask all 4 of you, really, what do you think our white allies can do in practice to help achieve racial justice? So I'll start with you, Gulwali.
Okay, I think white allies could do a lot. First of all, they need to be open-minded and not judgmental. The thing that kind of upsets me a lot more is that not only are people some people are racist on social media and they write things behind the keyboard, but actually when the Black Lives Movement's protest was happening in London, there were actually people coming out practically angry about, Black Lives Matter protesters, instead of saying, accepting and showing sympathy and solidarity and standing as an allies. But of course, they were, the right wings and racists. And I think sometimes people feel more uncomfortable with the fact that you tell them, oh, our country is racist and there's institutional racism, than with actual racism. And so I think our white allies really needs to stand with us. And I read somewhere a very beautiful quote that if you're here to help us, then you are in the wrong place. But if you are here to help us because your freedom is bound to our freedom, then yes, we can work together. So I think we need to work together they don't need to lead, they need to just support us and let people of color lead in protests and discussions and debates. And I feel like they need to kind of persuade the government, or works with our MPs to say, look, system needs to change. Our education needs to explain our role in the world, what bad we have done with the slave trade and as a result, the world we have now, and how we have kind of contributed in so many negative ways into the world. Yes, we have done a lot of positive stuff. There's just so many people who doesn't want to admit, racism exists. And when you talk to people, Black people are more likely to get stopped in search and people go to prison. They're like, well, sure, that because they're they're inherently violent. So there's this assumptions in society that, I don't know, it just continues to carry on. There has to be a break in the cycle. And we definitely we can't really change much without our allies and friends who have privileges, and they need to use that privileges for a positive example. Recently, I was speaking at an event, and there was this young man in Sheffield. He'd been shut down. He was talking about racism, and he was shut down by other panelists and so on. And then there was somebody wanted to ask a question. She was a white lady, and she said, I have a question, but I don't want to ask a question. I want to give my time to the young man to speak. And I think that was really, really wonderful. And then, just was a very small act because a lot of the time people, we don't realize that they have, a lot more chances of having opportunities, kind of challenging it. And just making a stand, just don't be a bystander, make a stand, make your voice heard. I believe people are good. I believe people are, we're not born racist. People become racist because of circumstances, events, environment, and so on. And there are a lot of good people. They just need to make a stand, speak out, and don't, when bad things are happening, when racist remarks are being said, make a stand and challenge it.
Yeah. No, absolutely spot on. Something that jumped out of what you were saying, the number of interview panels that I've been on, sat on, I've even chaired them, and somebody said to me, Nazir, could you ask the diversity questions? I wonder why you're asking me to ask the diversity questions. Why don't you, the white member of the panel, ask the diversity questions? And I think that's just a small way of being able to demonstrate that you understand what's going on. Same question to you, Amber. What do you think our white allies can do in practice to help achieve racial justice?
I think my answer is quite similar. So I think there's 2 things. I think following on from what I said previously about understanding, I think we have growing understanding is essential. I think it's a foundation when you understand the experiences that Black people and people of colour go through. You educate yourself on the systems that oppress us. I think that's essential. You can do that by listening to people, reading books, podcasts. There's so much out there, so there's not really an excuse for that. And then I think not staying silent is really important. And yeah, I think there's white privilege, and I think we said this before, even if you're working class or there's other things that you're not so privileged in, there's areas that you're not privileged in, you do have white privilege and there's power in that, and you can use that. Like there's been situations where I wish that someone could speak out for me, because I know that there's power dynamics that mean that I can't speak out. So I think, yes, not staying silent is really important.
Thank you very much indeed. And Amber, same question to you. Sorry, Fozia, same question to you.
You know, there's things like Black Pound Day, and there was, with the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a lot of people investing their money into Black-owned businesses. What I would recommend, instead of doing one-off purchases from these businesses, do that as well, but try and make your spending more consistent. So, for example, if you've got a grocery shopping a budget of £100 a week, dedicate some of that to getting some of your grocery shopping from a shop in a community that serves the community, and not these tax dodging corporations that you would normally shop from. So that's definitely one thing. Just make sure there's longevity and consistency in who you're spending your money on. I think, yeah. And then another thing, like kind of like what Amber said, don't stay silent, you know, stick up for everyone, especially within the workplace. If you feel like a microaggression's happened, ask the person, are you okay? But also report it. Like, you're not going to get prosecuted for reporting against that. And if anything, you can prosecute them if they don't do anything about it. So don't be afraid to report things, and, you know, stick with your gut as well. That's it.
Oh, that's absolutely very good practical suggestions there. Remember, again, what do you think our allies can do to help us achieve racial justice?
Yeah, I think, like everybody's been saying, it's about having the conversation, and having the conversation for understanding and knowledge. You know, so we'll be able to pass that knowledge down, you know, to the next generation, but that positive knowledge. You know, it's about understanding what prejudice is, what racism is, what discrimination is, and understanding those people that, you know, in the past here in the UK that have fought for, you know, justice, you know, and how and why. I mean, I'm delivering a leadership training this evening. That's why it's at the forefront of my mind. And we're going to be talking about, you know, the 1981 riots, you know, Moss Side, you know, Bob, Burnley, Oldham, and what was the other one? Is it
Toxteth?
Yeah, this Toxteth as well. You know, but the riots up here, that we're all about, you know, people fighting for their rights and, you know, discrimination against them. There are things that happened here, you know, in the North. A lot of things happened in the North to be able to move us all forward. We need to remember those. It's not just about, you know, America. Everybody, you know, we tend to push it over there and say that that's not us. I think what we need to do, and what our white allies need to do, is speak up, is ask the difficult questions, is try and understand why some of us feel aggrieved. A very quick story I'll tell you. One time I was coming up from London to Manchester on the train. Second class was absolutely full, chock-a-block. And so I decided, me and my colleague, that we'll go down into first class and pay the upgrade. So as we got to first class, the train manager stopped us, and he said to me, "Oh, that you look disorientated." First, I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And that's how I just thought, oh yeah, whatever. You know, I just want a seat, I want to sit down. And he says, "Should you be in first class?" And I thought, oh, and he said, "Can I see?" And before I answered, he asked, "Can I see your tickets?" Gave him my tickets and my credit card. He said, "Thought so." You know, and I thought, again, I just thought, whatever, you know, long day, whatever, just upgrade. And so after we finished the upgrade and he's walked off, the trolley comes out. The young lady asked me, what would I like to drink? You know, in first class, you get all this food, don't you, and all these drinks. And I could have done with a brandy or something. However, and then the young man goes, "Oh, we've been told not to serve them." So I said to him, "Excuse me, what did you say?" And he repeated it. He said, "Oh, the train manager said we shouldn't serve you, that you shouldn't be in first class." And I thought, I beg your pardon. So, you know, but after, cut a long story short, big kind of kerfuffle, argument and everything, because the train manager had said that, and he came back and said, yeah, that's what he felt, that we shouldn't be sitting in first class. But anyway, when it was all over and it died down, there was a gentleman in front, a white gentleman, all suited and everything, that stood up and apologized to me. And I asked him, what are you apologizing for? And he said, I apologize because I didn't do anything. He said, I've never seen racism. That was racism of the highest order. And I sincerely apologize because I didn't do anything. Now, this is the thing. Not being a standby person doing nothing, it's more helpful if you get involved in that conversation, especially when you know it's wrong. You know, get involved in the conversation and in the debate for the betterment, you know, of everybody. Because, you know, I've also said that I've been hosting a lot of conversations, you know, about racism. And I've said to a lot of Black people that white people have to be in the room as well. Because we know what we feel, we know what we've been through, so we can't talk to ourselves. White people need to be in the room, in that conversation, so that we all understand and we all are able to move forward. I think that's what the white allies can do.
No, those are really powerful statements and a really powerful story, Arinma. Thank you very much. Thank you all four of you for sharing. We could go on and go on, but I think the important thing is that as you mentioned a moment ago, our white colleagues have joined us in this conversation, and I want to thank them for giving up their time. You know, we can't do this alone. My point is that I shouldn't be the one. We shouldn't be the one asking the diversity question. We shouldn't be the one that keeps fighting when our colleagues next to us are seeing and witnessing and observing the same thing. And the casual racism or the covert racism that you mentioned, you know, which we come across on a daily basis pretty much. But we I don't know what it is. I mean, somebody said to me, Nazir, you're a role model. And you know, I'm absolutely exhausted being a role model. I don't want to be a role model. Why do I have to carry the burdens of my race and my color and my religion and my communities on my shoulders? Because the white person across the road doesn't have to. My colleague sitting next to me doesn't have to, you know, but I have to carry this burden, and it's a really exhausting burden to have to carry. And that's why, you know, it's our white colleagues and our white allies are the people who really can take that burden off us to make it so much easier for us to move forward. But I hope that, you know, we've gained, I know I've learned a great deal from this session, never mind our colleagues. And I see from the chat, there's been a really engaging chat. Now, you may not have heard at the outset, but we capture all the chat. We capture all the conversation. Please, if you've got any thoughts, share them in the chat and we'll capture that as part of our report. We hope that we can do this again and as we move forward. And the whole idea of the People's Powerhouse is to provide a platform for voices that are often aren't heard. You mentioned Home Secretaries. I remember I've sat down with ministers many times over the years, and I tell them over and over again, I am not the expert. The people who are the expert are the victims, survivors, the people who are impacted by whatever it is that's going on. Please listen to them. They're the most powerful statements and stories. I'm just a conduit. And they often think that that's good enough. That's not good enough. They need to speak to people who are most impacted by that. And I think we've heard some of the stories today. As a final closing, really, just to let you know, we're continuing this conversation this evening. We've got a young people's takeover tonight, and we have a session for 12 to 15-year-olds, which is jam-packed as I understand it, called Racism and Me at 4 o'clock. It'd be brilliant for you, to join us, brilliant for us, but also for you to join us to listen to what young people have to say on this subject at 4 o'clock tonight. And I hope that we can have a further conversation. Edna will, when we talk later on this evening about where we want the powerhouse to go, we really hope that we can be a platform to amplify the voices that, you know, sadly have had to take to the street. They've had to take to the street because they're not being heard in the mainstream. And we need more and more of you, I'm afraid. More and more of you to speak with us and join with us and give us strength. And this network becomes much stronger. I thank you very much indeed. I'm about to hand over now to Michael Taylor, who is chairing the Lightning Talks, which is our next session, and to you as well, Edna. Thank you all very much indeed.